Hello, this is Darren Pulsipher, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the Roaring 20s with Rachel Mushawar, VP of Sales at Intel. Rachel, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, Darren. I am honored and humbled to be here.
Oh, we're so happy that you're on the show. You actually love the show. You said, "Hey, this is great stuff, Darren," and thank you for supporting it and welcome. Today, I wanted to get your insight on, hey, what's going to happen this year? I mean, COVID threw us through a major paradigm shift, whatever you want to call it, disruption. Inflection point, I've heard them all. What do we see for 2021? Get out your crystal ball. Let us hear.
Right. So, there are so many emotions that people think about when they think about just the past 12 months. And clearly, 2020 was marked with unmistakable change and uncertainty for all of us professionally and personally. There were 47% of adults in their 40s and 50s had a parent 65 or older and were also trying to homeschool their children in 2020. We were all physically isolated and seeming stasis within our homes. But a remarkable thing happened. That remarkable thing is during this stretch of physical isolation, connectivity grew. The pace of change from a technology perspective accelerated. We've seen more technology happen in the last 12 months, Darren, than we had in the last 3 years. In fact, it has been COVID that has been the spur for most technology changes. And frankly, everyone's sense of possibility has been rejuvenated. And even though we've all been quarantined, we've also been unlocked and freed for the future and freed for bringing in the Roaring 20s. And the great thing about the Roaring 20s, before we get into some of the key trends, Darren, is every single one of us had to pause. All of us had to figure out what was important to us and what we were going to carry forward into the Roaring 20s. Nothing is going to be as it was. And now all of us hold our teams, our friends, our families, and the relationships that we've developed way closer than we ever have. In fact, 2020 was filled with so many black swan moments that we all had the opportunity to learn from and not be paralyzed by. And as we think about the Roaring 20s, not every year will be 2020, but the lessons of 2020 will make us better every year going forward. Here's to the Roaring 20s.
No, I hear you. I totally agree. My wife and I were actually talking about this the other day. What changed for us? We're doing our kids' business every day, where before, they just go off to school and maybe they have homework. And I also noticed my relationships with some of my customers are actually deeper now than they were before, because I'm not spending time on an airplane. I'm not, traveling somewhere, or it's much more. I hate to use the word intimate, but in some respects it is, and it's been a very fundamental shift in the way that we think about things. Totally agree.
It really has. But I'll tell you, the other thing is, the pandemic has created more responsibilities than ever before. And I think about you and I, Darren. We're kind of the sandwich generation, right?
Yeah, Xers, yep.
Yeah, we're juggling both the needs of children at home, and in my case, 4 young children homeschooling while still trying to run a billion-dollar business and caring for elderly parents. And then it just like this, it becomes almost a cacophony that you've got to navigate through. And whether your kids are in college or, they're a 3-year-old at home, you've got to figure out how to juggle all of those things. And I believe, one of the key things in 21 is going to be how we continue to leverage technology to keep us connected.
No, I totally agree. In fact, I just interviewed a company, and they'll be on the podcast in a couple of weeks, that took Zoom on steroids and made it a social thing. And they've been doing this for like 3 years, where they drop into people's cubes, even though people don't have cubes in their company, just like you would do in the office. Or there's water cooler. Hey, let's go meet at the water cooler and chat. They've extended the social things that we normally do at work into this virtual space, which is pretty clever. So I think we're going to see more and more ideas like that.
Well, and here's an interesting stat for you. 32% of US adults have had a virtual party or social gathering online with friends and family. And I'm not just talking about, like this communication that we're having, but you think about some of the things that we've done at Intel over the last year. We visited a virtual goat farm. We've had yoga instructors come in, and we've leveraged technology to really fight that isolation. And as we go into, the rest of the 20s, technology is going to become a cornerstone for every major transformation that's going to happen, regardless if it is the private sector or the public sector.
No, I agree. So what do you see? I mean, we know the change, the nomadic. I've got a nephew, great example. He was living in the Bay Area, San Francisco, paying $5,000 a month for his little apartment. He and his pals said, we can't go in the office. They've been living all over the world, working. Costa Rica, they're in Park City now. I'm like, so we're seeing this nomadic workforce as well, that, he has no kids, no family, nothing. So he's doing that. This remote work concept, I think, is here to stay. What do you think, as a CIO coming in this year, what do I need to focus on this year? What do you think is going to be key to getting out of this next year in a better position than at the beginning of the year?
So I think the most important part there, Darren, is, you talked about the nomadic lifestyle. I can't even imagine how awesome it would be to not work in my home office every single day and actually be able to work from Costa Rica. But unfortunately, sandwich generation, young kids, elderly.
We have responsibilities.
Yeah, we have different responsibilities.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about right now is really emblematic of the future of work. And we are living the future of work, right? It's not just the US that is a work from home economy. It is a global phenomena, right? Almost 85 or higher % of organizations have expanded or implemented, a variety of work from home policies that are going to extend past COVID-19.
Why do you think that is? I mean, I've heard that before, but why do you think that is the case?
So I think the old adage of, you've got to be in the office in order to be effective. And a lot of those old idioisms that, frankly, many of us grew up with have absolutely been shattered in 2020. As companies had to immediately pivot to work from home, many of the companies quickly realized that, geez, our real estate costs potentially could be reduced as we move forward because we're just as productive at home as we are in the office. In fact, the average workday at home has lengthened. So just think about your workday, right? For me, I get up in the morning, I get my 4 kids ready for school. They sit down and they do their homeschool. I start working. I don't have my commute anymore. As you said, I'm not on an airplane. I don't shut my PC down until well after dinner. I'm leveraging technology to connect in a different way. Now, I'm not saying that a longer workday is a good thing. I'm just saying it has been the result of people working from home.
No, I agree with you there. Because, hey, I can get to that thing I need to work on after dinner or after the kids are in bed, or I can do it tomorrow morning before anyone wakes up. That's my most productive time is 5 a.m. until the rest of the family starts waking up. So I know exactly what you mean. It's and that's a downside as well. We don't shut down.
That's right.
Right. Because literally in my house, my office was taken over by my kids doing homeschool, right? Online school. So I'm in the bedroom. My commute is the shortest it's ever been. Roll out of bed and there's my desk, right?
Right.
Right. So I totally understand that.
So, you know, the other thing that's interesting as you're talking about roll out of bed and there's my office. I've talked to a number of executive women who have come to the realization that, you know, they spend a minimum of 20 minutes a day just getting ready to go to work, whether that's hair, that's clothes, that's makeup. And one of the things that COVID has taught many of these women is you can save that 20 minutes and use that 20 minutes to listen to an innovative podcast, to get caught up on email. And, you know, I know this isn't a technology thing, but I'd be surprised that as we go into 21, if you start seeing more natural options at work. Certainly for me, I'm not going to do it anymore. I've threatened to show up to the office in yoga pants.
Well, in fact, in my podcast where I talk about 2020 in review, it's the business casual mullet, right? I don't know the last time I put on pants. I wear shorts all the time, right?
Yeah. So that reminds me of a funny story. This morning, as I rolled out of bed to my virtual office, my kids are like, geez, Mom, it's nice that you actually are in a different outfit than you've been wearing for the last 4 days.
Yeah, I've been there myself. I know exactly what you mean.
Let's talk a little bit, though, more about some of the, you know, and I know you have a podcast coming up around what 2020 looks like. And we're certainly, you know, I've just spent the last little bit talking about some of the advantages that technology has brought to companies. But I also think that it is extremely important for us to realize how fortunate we are to be able to homeschool our kids. And when that decision was made, my guess is many of the listeners either had laptops for their children or they were able to go out and get one. In fact, did you know that 1 in 4 American households have at least one child-age kid 14 years or younger at home? 1 in 4.
Wow, that's a lot.
Which is a lot, but then you add that into the digital divide and what that means as we move forward into the roaring 20s, right? You think about all of the students that have come from disadvantaged backgrounds who probably haven't had a computer to work on. In fact, a World Economic Forum study just said that 25% of US students from a disadvantaged background have not had a computer during the last year.
That's not how it should be. That's awful.
That's not how it should be. And if they haven't had a computer, they also haven't had access to the internet. So as we move into the roaring 20s, we've got a whole set or a whole generation of children that have just spent the last 12 months homeschooling, potentially without a computer, without access to the internet. And
it's increasing that digital divide.
It is.
And I was worried about that when this first happened as well. I said, I even told my wife, whoever gets online first has an advantage. And the kids that don't get online are going to be disadvantaged for sure.
Well, and here's something else interesting that I just learned. In December, all of the job losses in the US, all of them were women.
Wow.
All of them were women in December.
Did they say why?
They think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, you know, again, I talked about the pandemic creating a bunch more responsibilities. And when you've got young kids at home that are trying to homeschool and you're an hourly worker, how do you do it?
You don't. Yeah.
You don't. So I think as we go into the 20s, while there's a ton of opportunity, I still believe that we have got such a long ways to go in the 20s around gender equality. And certainly, you know, during lockdown, fathers have nearly doubled the time that they've spent on childcare. But when you've got all of the job losses in December belonging to women, and of that, even a higher percentage of URMs, we've got to go figure that out in the 20s. And it can't just be about technology.
No, I agree with you there. But hopefully technology can help.
Yes.
Right. And I think that can be the case. So as a CIO, let's get back to the CIOs out there. What do I do? What do I put in my roadmap for this year to overcome these problems that I'm potentially seeing here? Losing some of my workforce because they've got other responsibilities at home, dealing with people working from home. How does this all boil down?
So I think there's a handful of things that become almost strategic imperatives for IT. And I think one of those strategic imperatives really has to do with, I'm going to break this down into, you know, traditional IT, applications, network, and data center. So let's start with applications first. So from an application perspective, I think CIOs have really got to figure out how do they enable contactless, meaning how do you drive everything as a service? And this isn't just for retailers. This is for healthcare companies. This is for the government. This is for manufacturing and automating warehouses. What do you need to do to permanently boost your productivity by driving more contactless? What is your roadmap for everything as a service over the next 12 months? Okay. Point one.
Got it.
I think the second thing is around applications is, who are your consumers? Who are your customers? Whether your customer is, you know, mission centric, like it is in the public sector, or in the private sector, it's the average person at home. Really figuring out who is your consumer and how do they digest content. right? If you think about how you and I grew up, Darren, we grew up on Saturday mornings being the only day that there were cartoons on.
Absolutely.
The only day.
That was the best day of the week.
Right. And you didn't want to leave that TV because you might miss Scooby-Doo.
That's right. Yep.
But then as we started to grow up, then there would be cartoons occasionally after school, like DuckTales. I'm dating myself. And that's how they reached, that's how big companies reached their audience, was through that medium.
Yep.
But that's not the medium that people use anymore. So you think about Netflix Plus, Disney Plus, all the online video games. Most people aren't going to go back to a movie theater. So if you are thinking about your customer first, how are you accessing them? All right, so we've talked a little bit about, applications, and I just gave you a couple examples. When we talked about everything as a surface, that could be face recognition, that can be, robots, that can be, any number of things from an application perspective. The next really comes down to the network, and how important your network is, and that your network really becomes the turbo boost to all things digital. Now, obviously, to the CIOs that are out there, I'm assuming that there is an inherent level of security in all of these, because security's got to be top of mind for it's just embedded in these. But when it comes to the network, really thinking about, hey, if I'm going to automate my factories, or if I'm going to automate healthcare, or I'm going to provide telehealth, or I'm going to do something with the US Navy, do you have the network to enable that? And do you have the network to enable that in the next 5 years as 5G becomes more of a reality? Or are you still investing in yesterday's technology when it comes to the network?
Well, and I'm glad you brought this up, because the network is no longer just in your data center.
That's right.
Right. I mean, we saw a huge shift this last year with software as a service, and all of a sudden, and even in Intel, we accelerated the rollout of Office 365, Microsoft 365. I no longer get on the VPN at work anymore.
Right.
Right. Where before I was completely tied to it. Now I'm not. So now my network is extended beyond my traditional data center. So it's a key aspect that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think, gone are the days. And again, I grew up in the IT world where, we went from dial-up to WANs and LANs to what you just talked about of eliminating VPN. But I think too often, when people talk about, the trends of what's next, they don't talk about the importance of the network, because it's not sexy.
No, it's supposed to just be there and work, right?
Just like security. Nobody really wants to talk about security as a trend because it's not sexy and it's scary. But you start to think about all of the endpoints that are now becoming pervasive into our everyday life, right? I talked about everything as a service. So as you start to provide more kiosks, or as you start to provide, different ways to get to your customers, or different ways for your employees to access you, you have just increased the threat surface exponentially. And the CISOs out there, their minds are exploding, thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to manage all of those attack surfaces? Then you add on the network, and then you think about, the fact that everybody's got more and more devices, and as cities become smarter, and as there's more autonomous driving, then you've got all these different communication points, and you've got to figure that out as part of your security roadmap, right? It's not just about, securing data at rest and data in motion anymore. It's everything in between. And that's got to be a key aspect of any CIO's roadmap as we move into the 20s.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Not sexy, but important.
Yep.
In fact, critical.
Yeah, and I've seen too many companies ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get in over the top of their skis and they're in 5 feet of powder and they don't know what to do.
Oh, so. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, third point.
So let's talk about data centers.
Yeah, I don't know. Should we invest in data centers anymore? Everything's going to the cloud.
That's actually a funny statement. The reason I think it's funny is it's not, I think everyone is so wrapped up in data centers, cloud, and really where I'm headed, Darren, even as I start to make my next career move, is it's not about data centers. It's about centers of data.
Yep.
And where is that center of data going to be? And where will it best be served? Is it best served in an on-prem data center with certain workloads? Perhaps. You talked about Office 365. Where is that best served? Well, everybody in the IT world knows, right? That's a great workload to be in the cloud.
Yep.
But when you start to think about some super top secret things that are the DNA of your companies or the DNA of this country, some of those things may never move to the cloud. So for a CIO, it's super important to understand what are my centers of data and how are those centers of data providing service to my employees and to my customers. And when you start to think about it in that way, it starts to help you answer questions like, hey, if this is way out at the edge, how long does it take for something that's sitting at the edge to do the whole traverse of the network back to the data center, wherever the data center is? What does that look like? How do I start to think about using my network to, provide centers of data in ways that are closer to my employees or closer to my customers? So is the cloud growing? Absolutely. 30, 40% per year. Huge, huge cloud growth. And it's going to continue to grow. But the important part there for CIOs is to really figure out what makes the most sense as I'm starting to lay out my 5-year roadmap. What do I need to do with machine learning? What do I need to do with high performance compute? What do I do with voice assistants? Oh, and did I mention the network and security? When you start to think about them in those ways, it starts to really help you build out what is the right strategy for my centers of data in terms of recovery, in terms of storage, in terms of performance. All of those pieces become critically important because there's only so much money that CIOs have today. And how do you use that money in a way that optimizes your customers, optimizes your employees, and for those public companies, makes Wall Street happy?
Yeah, it's interesting because what you're talking about is the shift I've been preaching for the last 5 years or so. CIOs need to get out of managing infrastructure and managing data and information. They're not chief infrastructure officers, they're chief information officers. So maybe the pandemic has forced the hand of many because their main concern should be the information, not the infrastructure. And I like how you called it a center of data. I love that.
Well, you can coin it, Darren, and I will continue to follow you on your podcast and there's the data. Every single time I'm going to collect
There you go. I'll give you at least 0.5% of what I make with the podcast. How's that sound?
That's awesome, especially since your podcast is making $0.
That is exactly right.
But hey, if we can, all kidding aside, if we can start to share some of these concepts with your followership and they're able to make strategic changes both in their hiring practices and in how they service their customers, that's a good enough royalty for me.
Thanks for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you liked our episode, go ahead and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast or video streaming site. You can also find out more on embracingdigital.com. Until next time, keep moving forward and do something wonderful.